The familiar hum of engines filled the air as Rich stood on the landing pad of Angel's Haven, watching one of his teams return from their latest mission. The sleek, battle-worn ship touched down gracefully, its ramp lowering to reveal the team of Remnant angels within. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The team disembarked with smiles on their faces, clearly pleased with the success of their operation. They had been sent to deal with a small slaver faction that had ignored the Remnant Angels' previous warnings to cease their operations or face the consequences. But as Rich watched them more closely, he noticed something off. There was a tightness around their eyes, a tension in their shoulders that spoke of something more than just the usual post-mission adrenaline crash. Frowning, Rich made his way towards the team. "Welcome back," he called out, his voice carrying over the din of the bustling hangar. "How did it go?" The team leader, a seasoned veteran named Jax, stepped forward. "Mission accomplished, sir," he reported, his voice steady but his eyes troubled. "The slaver faction has been neutralized." Rich nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. "Walk with me, Jax," he said, gesturing for the team leader to follow him. As they moved away from the others, Rich lowered his voice. "What aren't you telling me, Jax? I can see something's bothering you and your team." Jax hesitated for a moment, his jaw clenching. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's worse than we thought, sir. These slavers, they weren't just selling people into labor or servitude. They were selling to cannibals." Rich felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. In all his years fighting against the horrors of the galaxy, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. "Cannibals," he repeated, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Jax nodded grimly. "We found evidence at their base. Logs, communications. It's a whole network, sir. They've been supplying these monsters with people to eat. Humans, aliens, it doesn't matter to them." Rich's mind reeled with the implications. Just when he thought they were making progress against the slave trade, just when he thought they were bringing some measure of justice to the galaxy, this new horror emerged. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You did good work, Jax," he said, placing a hand on the team leader's shoulder. "Get your team some rest. I'll handle this from here." As Jax walked away, Rich's mind was already racing. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about slavery anymore. This was about stopping a level of depravity that he could scarcely comprehend. He activated his comm unit. "Nora, Trevor, Louise," he barked. "Meet me in the command center immediately. We've got a situation." As he strode towards the command center, Rich's resolve hardened. The Remnant Angels had faced countless challenges in their fight for justice, but this was something else entirely. But they would face it head-on, as they always did. Because that's what they did. They brought light to the darkest corners of the galaxy, no matter how horrifying the darkness might be. The command center of Angel's Haven buzzed with tense energy as Rich briefed his core team on the horrifying discovery. Nora, Trevor, and Louise listened with growing disgust and determination as Rich laid out what they knew about the cannibal colony. "This goes beyond anything we've faced before," Rich said, his voice grim. "We're not just dealing with slavers anymore. These people are consuming sentient beings. We need to put a stop to this immediately." Luis was already at work, his fingers flying over the holographic interface as he pulled up every scrap of data they had on the colony. "I've got a location," he announced. "It's a remote planet in the outer rim, barely charted. Perfect place to hide something this monstrous." "What's our plan?" Trevor asked, his hand resting on the butt of his blaster. Rich's eyes hardened. "We go in quiet. We need to assess the situation, free any prisoners we can, and then deal with the leadership. We can't risk a full frontal assault. There might be captives in the line of fire." Nora nodded in agreement. "We'll need stealth gear, non-lethal weapons for the initial infiltration. We don't want to spook them into hurting there." Their food supply, the words left a bitter taste in her mouth. The next few hours were a flurry of activity as the team prepared for the mission. They loaded up with advanced stealth suits, sonic stunners, and enough firepower to take on an army if things went south. As their ship broke atmosphere and headed towards the cannibal planet, Rich felt a knot of tension in his stomach. They'd faced some dark things in their time, but this This was a new level of depravity. The planet loomed before them, a nondescript brown and green orb that gave no hint of the horrors it harbored. Luis guided their ship to a landing site several kilometers from the colony, using the planet's dense forests as cover. Remember, Rich said as they disembarked, "We're here to gather intel and free prisoners if we can. No engaging the enemy unless absolutely necessary. We need to see what we're dealing with before we make our move." The team moved through the forest with practiced ease, their stealth suits rendering them nearly invisible in the dim light. As they approached the outskirts of the colony, the first signs of habitation became visible crude buildings and makeshift barriers. And then they saw them. Cages. Dozens of them, scattered throughout the colony, each one filled with terrified captives, humans and aliens alike. Rich felt bile rise in his throat as he witnessed a group of colonists approach one of the cages, eyeing the occupants like cuts of meat in a butcher's shop. He had to physically restrain himself from charging in right then and there. "This is worse than we thought," Nora whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "We need to get these people out of here." Rich nodded, his jaw set in grim determination. "Agreed. But we need to be smart about this. We can't save everyone if we get ourselves killed." As they continued their covert reconnaissance, gathering intel and mapping out the colony's defenses, Rich's mind was already formulating a plan. They would free these prisoners, and then they would make sure that nothing like this ever happened again. As night fell on the cannibal colony, Rich and his team put their rescue plan into action. They had spent hours observing the guards' patrol patterns and the layout of the cages. Now, it was time to move. Remember, Rich whispered to his team, "Stealth is key. We free as many as we can without raising the alarm. If we're compromised, we switch to plan B and go loud." They split into pairs, Rich with Nora and Trevor with Luis. Moving like shadows in the darkness, they approached the first set of cages. Rich's heart pounded in his chest as they got closer. The stench of fear and despair emanating from the cages was almost overwhelming. Inside, he could see the huddled forms of the captives, their eyes wide with terror at every sound. Nora worked quickly on the lock, her skilled fingers making short work of the primitive mechanism. As the door swung open, Rich stepped inside. "We're here to help," he whispered, his voice low and reassuring. "We're going to get you out of here, but you need to be quiet and follow our instructions. Can you do that?" The captives nodded, hope dawning in their eyes for the first time in who knew how long. Over the next hour, Rich and his team worked tirelessly, moving from cage to cage, freeing prisoners and guiding them to a predetermined extraction point in the nearby forest. Luis had rigged up a signal that would alert their backup team to come and evacuate the freed captives. But as they worked, Rich knew they were on borrowed time. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed the empty cages. Just as they were freeing the last group of prisoners, a shout rang out across the compound. "The cages! The meat is escaping!" Rich's blood ran cold at the casual way they referred to sentient beings as meat. He keyed his comm. "Plan B, people. Get the last of the prisoners to the extraction point. I'll create a diversion." Before Nora could protest, Rich was moving, drawing his blaster and firing at the nearest guard tower. The night erupted into chaos as alarms blared and shouts filled the air. Rich ducked and weaved through the compound, drawing fire and attention away from his team and the escaping prisoners. His blaster sang in his hand, taking down any cannibal foolish enough to get in his way. As he fought, he caught glimpses of true horror kitchens filled with body parts, tanning racks hung with skins of various colors and textures. Each sight only fueled his rage and determination. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, he heard Nora's voice in his ear. "Prisoners secure, Rich. Get out of there." Rich didn't need to be told twice. He threw down a series of smoke grenades and made a run for the extraction point, his lungs burning and his heart pounding. As he reached the forest's edge, he saw Nora waiting for him, her face a mix of relief and exasperation. "Cutting it a bit close, weren't you?" she said, but there was no real anger in her voice. Rich managed a grim smile. "Had to make sure our new friends got a proper Remnant Angels welcome." As they made their way to the rendezvous point, Rich's mind was already on the next phase of their mission. They had saved many lives tonight, but the job wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The leaders of this colony needed to be dealt with, and Rich was going to make damn sure they never harmed another soul again. The real battle was just beginning. With the rescued prisoners safely evacuated, Rich and his team regrouped at the edge of the forest, their faces grim with determination. The initial rescue mission had been successful, but they all knew the most challenging part lay ahead. "All right, Team," Rich said, his voice low and intense. "We've dealt a blow to their operation, but now it's time to cut off the head of the snake. We're going after their leadership." Trevor checked his weapon, a fierce glint in his eye. "Just say the word, boss. I'm ready to make these bastards pay." Rich nodded, understanding the sentiment but cautious of letting anger cloud their judgment. "Remember, our primary goal is to stop this for good. We need to be smart about this." They moved through the colony with purpose, no longer bothering with stealth. The alarm had been raised, and the entire compound was in chaos. Cannibals ran in all directions, some trying to recapture escaped prisoners, others preparing for a fight. As they approached the center of the colony, where intelligence suggested the leadership was housed, they encountered the first organized resistance. A group of heavily armed guards opened fire from a fortified position. "Take cover," Rich shouted, diving behind a nearby structure. The team reacted instantly, finding shelter and returning fire. The battle was intense, with both sides exchanging heavy fire. Rich and his team worked in perfect sync, covering each other and slowly advancing. Their experience and superior training began to show as they steadily pushed back the cannibal forces. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the compound. Luis, who had been providing tech support and monitoring communications, shouted over the comm, "Rich, they're trying to destroy evidence. They're burning down the processing facilities." Rich gritted his teeth. "We can't let them cover this up. Nora, Trevor, keep pushing forward. Luis and I will deal with the fires." As Nora and Trevor continued to engage the main force, Rich and Luis broke off, racing towards the billowing smoke at the far end of the compound. They arrived to find several buildings engulfed in flames, with cannibals hurriedly tossing documents and equipment into the inferno. Without hesitation, Rich and Luis sprang into action. They fought their way through the cannibals, stunning some and being forced to use lethal force on others who refused to stand down. All the while, Luis worked frantically to salvage what data and evidence he could from the burning buildings. As they battled the flames and the cannibals, Rich couldn't shake the horror of what he was seeing. The processing facilities were a nightmare made real, filled with tools and machinery designed for the systematic butchering of sentient beings. It took every ounce of his self-control not to give in to the rage building inside him. Meanwhile, Nora and Trevor had fought their way to the central building. They breached the doors, engaging in close-quarters combat with the cannibal leader's personal guards. The fighting was brutal and intense, but the team's skill and determination proved superior. As the last of the guards fell, they found themselves face to face with the leadership of the cannibal colony, a group of well-dressed individuals who looked more like corporate executives than the monsters they truly were. Rich and Luis rejoined them, smoke-stained and grim-faced, just as Nora was securing the leaders. The look on Rich's face, as he surveyed the captured cannibals, was one of cold, hard fury. The confrontation had been won, but the real challenge lay ahead. How to ensure that this horror never happened again, and how to bring these monsters to justice in a galaxy that sometimes seemed to have forgotten the meaning of the word. As sirens wailed in the distance and the fires continued to burn, Rich knew that the next few moments would shape the future of not just this colony, but potentially the entire sector. They had come to deliver justice, and now it was time to see that justice done. The leaders of the cannibal colony sat bound and silent, their once pristine clothing now stained with soot and blood. Rich stood before them, his team flanking him, as the fires that had engulfed parts of the compound slowly died down in the background. "You have two choices," Rich said, his voice cold and hard as steel. "You can cooperate fully, provide us with every scrap of information about your operation and your collaborators, and face justice for your crimes. Or you can resist and will ensure that every civilized system in the galaxy knows exactly what you've done here." The leaders exchanged glances, fear evident in their eyes. One of them, a woman with graying hair and a sharp face, spoke up. "And if we cooperate, what then?" Rich's expression didn't waver. "Then you'll face a fair trial. I can't promise leniency. What you've done here is beyond forgiveness. But you'll have a chance to explain yourselves to a court of law rather than facing summary justice." After a moment of tense silence, the leaders nodded their agreement. Rich turned to Louise. "Get every bit of data you can from them. Names, dates, shipping manifests, everything. We're going to dismantle this entire network." As Louise set to work, Rich activated his comm unit. "This is Rich Greaves of the Remnant Angels. I need a containment and investigation team at my coordinates immediately. We've got a situation here that requires delicate handling." Within hours, another team of Remnant Angels arrived, along with representatives from several galactic law enforcement agencies. The scale of the horror they had uncovered was too big for them to handle alone. This would require a coordinated effort across multiple systems. As the prisoners were led away and forensic teams began the grim task of processing the compound, Rich gathered his team. "You all did outstanding work today," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We've saved lives and put a stop to something truly monstrous. But this is bigger than we initially thought. The network these cannibals were part of spans multiple sectors." Nora nodded grimly. "So what's our next move?" Rich's eyes hardened with determination. "We follow every lead, track down every collaborator. This isn't just about slavery anymore, it's about protecting the very concept of sentient rights. We won't rest until every part of this network is exposed and dismantled." Trevor spoke up, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "How do we come back from something like this, boss? How do we keep fighting when we've seen this?" Rich placed a hand on Trevor's shoulder. "We keep fighting because we must. Because if we don't, who will? We're the Remnant Angels. We bring light to the darkness, no matter how deep that darkness might be." As they boarded their ship to return to Angel's Haven, Rich couldn't shake the weight of what they'd discovered. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but he had never imagined the depths of depravity they'd witnessed today. But as he looked at his team, saw the resolve in their eyes and the strength in their stance, he felt a glimmer of hope. They had faced the worst the galaxy had to offer and emerged victorious. They had saved lives and brought monsters to justice. The road ahead would be long and difficult. The network they had uncovered would not be easy to dismantle. But Rich knew that they would not rest until the job was done. They would continue to fight, to protect the innocent and bring hope to the hopeless. For that was their mission, their purpose. As Angel's Haven came into view, Rich allowed himself a small smile. They had won a battle today, but the war was far from over, and he would be there, on the front lines, until the very end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you loved it. Please remember to subscribe if you did like it so you can see more videos like this. And please give us a like and a comment too. I'll see you in the next one.